Our last speaker up, Professor Judith Trotman. Judith is a Senior Staff Specialist and Director of the Clinical Research Unit in the Haematology Department at Concord Repatriation General Hospital. She'll be discussing access to treatments and understanding clinical trials. Thanks, Judith.
Thank you very much. I think it's about 5 years since I was Director of the Research Unit. I've passed that on to a young gun. Look, it's so lovely to see you all here. Patient education is our happy space. I am actually going to also introduce you, because I've dragged her from the clinicians' room, to Dr. Burton. If you wouldn't mind standing up, Kathy. We are so grateful we have got Dr. Burton over from the UK as our keynote speaker in lymphoma. At this ALLG meeting, and I said, come on into the room, the patients will love to hear from you. So she's under instructions to interrupt and add any extra value feedback about clinical trials as I speak, and she's got a good loud voice, so she'll be able to do that. So as a result of this session, I want you to feel confidence in clinical trials and not feel a sense of fear of being a guinea pig, but really understand that good clinical research that is conducted under the highest integrity in terms of science and ethics is deeply embedded into the advances that result in more cures and better lives for patients with lymphoma and indeed all blood cancers. I want you to understand why we do trials, what are some of the trials that are actually out there at the moment, and also we'd like you to become groupies with the ALLG. We want you to understand that we've got this great big cooperative group across Australia and New Zealand where all the teaching hospitals, whether they be in the cities or regional, are committed to the cooperative clinical trials research that addresses your priorities, and we welcome your feedback and engagement about your priority settings. So what is a clinical trial? And there is going to be a bit of science here. There has to be science because clinical trial is science. It's a very carefully designed study conducted in humans under the code of GCP. Now, what is the code of GCP? It's an international code of good clinical practice that ensures that you, as the participant in a clinical trial, have your rights and your safety and your well-being placed above all other considerations in clinical research. That is absolutely mandatory and core to good clinical research. So under the code of GCP, we seek to determine under controlled conditions, first the safety and then the effectiveness of a new treatment approach. And here I might just segue and ask you to put your hand up if you are aware you've ever been on a clinical trial. Only 3 hands. There's supposed to be 6% of lymphoma patients around Australia are on clinical trials, and yet we've got the most well-informed, motivated bunch in the room, and there's only 3 of you. Have any of you been on 2 trials? 2? Yeah. Well done. Congratulations to, well done. So thank you for your pioneering contribution, which adds to the advances for all patients. So we have them to improve treatment for patients. And here's a New Zealand Air Force pilot who was on a Hodgkin lymphoma trial for advanced stage Hodgkin lymphoma. And because of his contribution and the contribution of hundreds of patients, whether they were in Germany or Australia on this clinical trial, they established a new standard of care, dialing down the toxicity. Oops. I've done the wrong thing. Dialing down the toxicity of this escalated bear cop regimen by adding a clever targeted therapy with less chemotherapy. And this study, of which Hemi was a participant, was actually published in Lancet, one of the leading medical journals, just last year. So it's there to improve treatments and outcomes for patients, to answer scientifically valid research questions. We also do use them. Those of us who are clinical trials zealots use them as a means of accessing new treatments for our patients, because the PBS is great, but the PBS is late. And it's many years often when a drug has been shown in early phase trials to be very effective before we actually get access to these drugs. So often we get access to these drugs that are available and utilised in the US through different clinical trials answering specific questions. Is this open for a reason? No, good. It's very distracting. There's lots going on out there. And obviously to improve knowledge to change practice. So, as I said to you, it's all about safety first, but once we've done the lab studies in different cell lines or little animal models, we then move on to what is called a phase 1 clinical trial. So it's very simple, 1, 2 and 3. Phase 1, where safety is number 1. You're testing very small incremental increasing doses of a new therapeutic agent, a new medicine, in a small number of patients to make sure it is safe to deliver. Now, some phase 1 trials will give a little signal of efficacy, the effectiveness of the agent, but the real priority of phase 1 trials is drug safety. And then after it's been shown to be safe, and after we've worked out what's called the MTD, the maximum tolerated dose, so it's a safe dose to give, we then test that in a larger cohort of patients in a phase 2 study. And any of you who have been on a clinical trial and have signed consent for that same clinical trial half a dozen times, that might be because that drug that has been shown to be very safe in a phase 1 trial has then moved on to phase 2 in the same clinical trial. And there have been lots of adjustments to the trial as more and more is known about the safety and efficacy of the drug. And that usually involves several dozen or hundreds of patients. And efficacy, gosh, wouldn't it be nice, Kathy, if we had thousands of patients in our lymphoma trials? It's usually several hundred patients in our large phase 3 trials. But some of our lymphoma trials, like the trials that demonstrated the efficacy of rituximab maintenance and the efficacy of obinutuzumab, were 1,200 patient studies.
Yeah, I think we achieved that with international collaboration.
We do, and that's a good plug for international collaborations, and we're particularly friendly with our UK colleagues at the moment, as you can imagine. Yeah. All right. Never give up on a crisis. And Brexit and the Trump effect has brought Australia and the UK very close together. Why do you think we've brought her over? And so, I've kept this cartoon in because I do like it. This is sort of the lab testing. So, we've done the study in the labs. Now, what are we going to do? So they follow a plan, and that plan is called the protocol. And the protocol is our Bible. No, I shouldn't call it a Bible, should I? Because we shouldn't deviate from the protocol except for one reason. Anyone like to give a reason why we should deviate from the protocol? Safety. Thank you. You are a really good clinical trials ambassador. Thank you, Simon. Safety comes back to that. Your safety is paramount. And so if your safety is challenged by following the protocol, we are allowed to deviate from the protocol, but with good justification. And that's often a reason why protocols are amended and there's reconsent for patients. There's a number of highly regulated processes. Once we think of a clinical trial, it might actually, start operating. You can tell me when you get it operating in the UK, Kathy, but it often will take like 2 years before it actually starts operating here in Australia. And I suspect you're probably a little bit faster in the UK.
But only by maybe a few months, maybe 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah. So it does take a long time for the regulatory wheels to go through. And an ethics committee will always review both the science and the ethical underpinnings of the clinical trial before it's ever approved. And then, of course, the governance office and the lawyers are the ones who turn what should be a simple 2-page summary into a 30-page document. Okay, and it's very, very overwhelming for so many patients, but we do try in some of our trials to give a sort of an executive summary, and we also, in the ALLG, we have our consumer representative group who look through our documents and really try and make sure our patient information and consent documents are as simple as they can be. But the problem is, you're all so different, all right? Some of you want it simple on 1 page, and others of you will put red ink through all 30 pages and want to ask more. So we try and reach the happy medium. Yes, some of them are lawyers, aren't they? Oh my goodness. I've got to say, Kathy, I should speed along, I promise. But I work out at Concord Hospital, but I trained at St. Vincent's. Who's a patient at St. Vincent's? Because I don't want to offend you too much. But you know what? You're a pretty high maintenance bunch, aren't you? Okay? And then I came to Concord. Who's at Concord? Oh, good on you. So yes, right. So Concord patients are great patients. They put a lot of trust in you, and they ask some very sensible questions, but they don't come with 3 pages of questions filling up my public clinic. I don't know. How are the patients in Leeds, Kathy?
Leeds, but they're very obedient.
They're very obedient. Yes, Concord patients are very obedient too. But, you know, it is that nice sort of balance between, you know, balancing your deep, intimate knowledge of your own body and your own disease, which you may have had for 10 weeks or 10 years, and your Google search, which may have been for many hours, and my 30 years of clinical practice. But we get there in the end. Okay, so the clinical trial team is not just your doctor. All right, you have a whole army of people behind that doctor, your clinical research nurse, your study coordinator, and I call them your study concierge, because they are there to make sure you do the right thing at the right time, and that I do the right thing at the right time, and that you get hold of me when you need me fast. All right, so they're really there to help you navigate the whole clinical trial journey within the health system. And that is sometimes the best advantage of participating in a clinical trial, even when you're receiving what might be standard of care in the clinical trial. Because we actually didn't talk about phase 3 trials, I'm sorry. So phase 3 trials is what we call the randomized clinical trial, where we compare we compare the standard of care treatment, which might be rituximab and CHOP, with the new proposed treatment. So one message I want you to go home with today is we never randomize anyone to a placebo unless the standard of care is observation. So that might be looking at rituximab treatment as a sole treatment for your follicular lymphoma compared to watch and wait observation. Okay, so please don't ever think that if you're participating on a clinical trial, you're going to be given a placebo instead of treatment when you should be having treatment for your disease. So that's the clinical trial team, and we will assess your eligibility, and we will start the screening and informed consent process. And it's not a one, and I'd love your reflections on this, Kathy, it's not a one-stop thing, the informed consent process. We don't talk to you about the trial and then get you to sign the 30-page consent form there and then. It's an iterative process, sometimes ideally over multiple appointments as we start thinking that a clinical trial might be appropriate for you. You cannot possibly expect to understand everything there is to know about a clinical trial, in one consultation. And even when you do consent to participate in the trial, you're going to be learning as you go about the clinical trial. So don't feel too anxious that you don't know all the nitty-gritty about when you have to be on day 4 and day 5 and how many blood tests you need to have over the next 3 weeks and all that sort of thing. Your clinical trial coordinator or nurse will take you through that process. I think what the most important thing is feeling that you can trust the team. You've read enough about it, you've learned enough about it to feel, yep, I'm ready to jump in, and trust that the team will tell me if there's going to be any changes to the protocol. Any further comments there, Kathy?
I think we do similar. I think with the screening, sometimes if we know a trial about the open but isn't quite open, you can't actually give out the patient information sheet. But then sometimes we send them out to patients so they have the opportunity to before it comes to clinic. And I think the point you make is talking to the whole team. It's not just the doctor, it's the nurse, the trial coordinators, because I think they've often got maybe slightly different perspectives on the trial.
And the nitty-gritty requirements, because when you go through the consent process of the trial, you're going to tell them about what I call as sort of the PPRV, the purpose of the trial, the procedures that are required to be done, and then the risks, the potential risks of participation. There are always risks to participating, even if it's only, risk from a car accident on the way to too many hospital appointments, and the alternative options for you if you were not to participate in the trial, and the fact that it is voluntary at all times, not just the moment you sign the consent form, but that you can pull out of the trial at any time. And I think I might have a slide about this. I haven't done this for a year, so I can't remember it's a bit lucky dip what slide is coming. So during the trial, you're going to be monitored very carefully, and there is one extra burden of participating in a clinical trial. All right, you will, generally speaking, get more blood tests and more clinic appointments than you would in your routine day-to-day care. We try and limit that so that it is not too burdensome, but we have a duty of care, not just to you, but to the integrity of the study and making sure the data and the safety is paramount. And then once the clinical trial has completed recruitment and it's got its 300 or 1,000 patients, it will often take another year or 2 or even 5 years before the results of the clinical trials read out, before you've got enough follow-up if your primary endpoint is survival or duration of remission, or what we call progression-free survival for some lymphomas where relapse is a potential risk.
I think that's a really important part of the point, isn't it, Judith?
Nice and loud, thanks, Kathy. Have we got a phone? Let's give Kathy a microphone.
I just think,
in terms of the feed out from trials, it often is 2 or 3 years later, but what's really nice is then to be able to share some of those results with patients that have been into trials. So I really try to do that if I've been to international conferences and just say, look, the trial you were in has just reported out, this is what it showed, especially if they've been on the correct arm, the beneficial arm, that's always easier. But I think patients really feel then, it's really good feedback that you've contributed, that it's been a big, international trial, which it quite often is, and that, that's the output from it. So I think it's good to be able to share that.
I think those lay summaries are so important. I'll tell you a lovely story. Sorry. I'm getting into trouble from getting the evil eye from Kate here. We participated in Australia, and I was sort of leading the Australia and New Zealand contingent in a study called the Rathel study, which was a study of response-adapted therapy in Hodgkin lymphoma, where we were using the PET after 2 cycles of chemotherapy to sort of dial down the chemotherapy for patients. And this was led by Kathy and her colleagues in the UK. And we were so excited about the Rathel study because it had been accepted for publication in the preeminent New England Journal of Medicine, which is, the top journal of medicine. And we were so thrilled. And I said to Peter Johnson, come on, we've got to do a lay summary and we've got to be ready with our press releases. So I was busy writing lay summaries and press releases because he's not a PR kind of guy. So anyway, we did this and we released it all on the day of the Brexit vote. So I always remember when the Brexit vote was, Kathy, because we got zero interest in the Rathel study. And all the years and years and the hundreds and hundreds of patients who had made their contribution to reducing the amount of chemotherapy for young and old with Hodgkin lymphoma went by without a whisper. But it still made a huge, important impact on people's lives. And all the Hodgkin studies that Kathy has led since then have iteratively improved the safety, dialed down the toxicity, and improved the efficacy of our treatments for Hodgkin's. So because of trial after trial after trial, the vast majority of patients with Hodgkin lymphoma are cured and living well after their treatments. It's a really exciting time to be a lymphoma doctor. So, here we go. Here's my sort of memo about, let me go back. Oh, no. You've got a lot of faith in me if I can't even manage a PowerPoint pointer. So I remember my PPRP, the purpose, the protocol, the risks of participation, the potential benefits, because we can't guarantee any benefits, all right? It's always potential benefits, the alternative treatment options, and the fact that it's voluntary, and the assurance that if it's no longer, and this is something that's really important for me to stress to my patients, the trial, I'm offering you participation in the trial because I believe it is the best thing for you. And if I ever believe that your continued participation in the trial is no longer in your best interests, I will be telling you to withdraw yourself from the trial. And that sometimes is a little bit confronting for some patients when we have to change tack and stop trial participation. And obviously the patient has to be competent of documenting consent or their surrogate. So why do patients consent to participate? Because of the direct benefit from them. They want to get their hands on that new emerging therapy. Because there is some data, it's not hugely robust, but there are definitely some data that suggests that if you participate in a clinical trial, your outcomes are better even if you're receiving standard of care. And it's probably related to that concierge, making sure we're all doing the right thing at the right time, at the right dose, and etc. And obviously for altruistic reasons. And I'm so amazed at how many people, and some people I also treat acute leukemia where the prognosis is not nearly as good as it is with most lymphomas. And some patients will participate in clinical trials that are dose-finding trials that they know probably won't help them, but they want to advance things, medical science, for the patients who follow after them. And so, you know, the sense of being a pioneer is really important, and that paying it forward for other patients. Because, you know, all those rituximab trials, imagine if we didn't have rituximab to treat B-cell lymphoma, if we didn't have those trials 20 so years ago. So the benefit to medicine and science and to future patients is very important. Why wouldn't you participate? And it's very important because I have some patients say, no, I'm not going to be a guinea pig. I'm not going to participate in a trial. I don't want to hear about it. And I say to them, well, okay, but just as informed consent is very important, so is informed dissent. So I want you to listen about the trial and understand why you're saying no. It might not be the right question for you, and that's absolutely fine. The risks might be considerably, you know, the balance of the risks might be unacceptable to you, and that always must be acknowledged and quantified as best we can for you. For some people it's just easier. They don't have to think about another thing when you're faced with this new diagnosis and dealing with the treatments in the hospital. You've never been in a hospital before, you know, dealing with all those things, dealing with the clinical trial and the paperwork and the extra bloods and the protocol. It's just one thing too much. They want to keep it simple. And that's particularly relevant when patients are newly diagnosed, particularly if they've got an aggressive lymphoma and we're, you know, clipping along. We need to get started on your treatment pretty quickly. And it is sometimes considered just too onerous. And so that's really important to appreciate. There are reasons why you shouldn't participate. So just a little bit about us, the Australasian Leukemia Lymphoma Group. We are are binational. I hope you've picked up the Kiwi accent, all right. We are an Australian and New Zealand cooperative blood cancer trial organisation, and we've got 1,400 members who are all volunteers. We've got this amazing staff of 30 or 40 now, isn't it now, Kate? This amazing organisation of clinical trials operations staff at the ALLG. But all the haematologists, all the scientists, the pharmacists, the nurses who do this because they believe in investigator-initiated research that is focused on your priorities. And we all love participating in industry clinical trials, all right? Industry are the ones who have the good drugs, and we love their trials, and we love getting access to their drugs. But we also like our trials where we repurpose their drugs, or we tweak things so that it leads to not just better treatments but better lives for our patients. And so there's a really important sort of symbiotic relationship that we have at the ALLG with our pharmacy, with our industry partners, and some of their trials, we'll all participate in clinical trials in our own hospitals. And some of the times they will help sponsor and fund. Sorry, they won't sponsor, but they will help fund and partner with us in our clinical trials. Because, you know, industry partners, wouldn't you agree? You can't do all trials for all people. And so sometimes the cooperative groups around the world have to provide those complementary studies. And it's not-for-profit organisation, and we're a registered charity. And go back to your own doctors and say, are you an ALLG member? All right? If you can do one thing for me, go and ask your treating haematologist, are you an ALLG member? Because I've been to the ALLG symposium with Lymphoma Australia, and I'm pretty wowed by all the stuff they do. And is that the end, Kate? I can't remember what else I had. Oh, all right. So this is just a bit of blurb about the members who design these trials, and each one of these people is a lead of a different group within the ALLG. And since we're at a lymphoma talk, I'll point out to you Professor Michael Dickinson and Gareth Gregory are our lymphoma group chairs, and Stephen Opat, the chronic lymphocytic leukemia chair. This is one patient who celebrates his 70th with chronic myeloid leukemia. My patient Brian, he's been on his he was on his clinical trial almost 20 years ago, in a time when we didn't think we could cure chronic myeloid leukemia, and now he's off drugs and cured, and never thought at the age of early 50s he would celebrate his 70th. And I don't need to see him in clinic anymore, but I get him to come back once a year to make me feel good. Okay, you know, we need to feel good. Doctors need the good vibe. You have a few you keep coming back to, you, Kathy, do you, for the vibe?
You have your favourites, don't you?
Yeah, you have your favourites. All right, so inform yourself, all right? The ALLG is only a Google search away, okay? The Lymphoma Australia have so much material online about clinical trials. Always ask your treating haematologist at each stage of your journey when you need to have a new treatment, is there a clinical trial I should be screened for? Now you notice I didn't say I should be enrolled for. All right, screening. Screen everyone and enroll some. Okay, because not every trial is the right fit for every patient. And so screening is what is absolutely central. And Kathy, they want you back. Yes. But thank you for coming and adding your commentary. We're winding it up. There you go. No, we don't need all this stuff. Lots of stuff on the internet now. But ask your treating doctor.